Hey, this is Shane Long, wedding and portrait photographer based out of Minnesota and Southwest Florida. Today I'm doing a review of my Canon RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM lens. I'm going to be comparing it to the Canon 85mm f1.2 and the Canon 85mm f2. We're going to take a look at the background blur, the autofocus, the sharpness, and so much more to help you decide which lens is right for you. All right, here we go. As we begin, let's talk briefly about why you might need an 85mm lens. 85 is a wonderful focal length for portraits. It renders facial proportions in a flattering and beautiful way. This focal length brings the background a little bit closer through compression. When I'm photographing with an 85mm lens on one camera, I pair it with a 35mm lens as seen here on my other camera. Here I am at a recent wedding. I use my 35mm lens to set the context of where we are, and my 85mm lens to display through tighter crops the emotions of the day. Again, context and then emotions. 85 can also be great for full body portraits as it flattens out the ground, minimizing the space below the feet. On a wedding day, I use the 85mm a lot for individual portraits, both headshots and full body, the ceremony, the reception details and speeches, golden hour, and then the dance. Canon currently offers 3 85mm lenses. For the first section of this video, I will be analyzing the newly released RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM. Later in the video, I will compare this lens to Canon's 2 other offerings. I've owned this lens for over a week now, and I've had it on multiple photo shoots and taken thousands of photos with it. I'm going to show images from those sessions, but I want to begin by saying I have been absolutely blown away by this lens. Let's start by talking about just how sharp this lens is from the center to the edge of the frame. Even wide open at f1.4, the RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM is extremely sharp throughout the entire frame. We set up a tripod so that we could test the sharpness. If we look at a 300% crop, we will see this lens leaves nothing to be lacking in terms of sharpness in the center. And if we look at a photo here where the subjects are spread out, if we go to the edge of the frame, you will see that they remain perfectly sharp. Here I've composed my daughter off on the side, and when I zoom in, this lens still creates a perfectly sharp image. I love this because I know that as long as I keep my subjects in the same focal plane, even the people on the edge of the frame will be sharp when I shoot at f1.4. I can stop down if I want to put more in focus, but if I want to pop them out from the background, this lens allows me to do that. When I stop down from f1.4 to 2 to 2.8 to 4, I barely notice a difference in the sharpness because this lens is so sharp to begin with. In addition to great low light performance, one of the main reasons people buy wide aperture lenses is so that they can blur out the background. Beautiful bokeh creates a dreamy, romantic feel, but I know that preferences in bokeh can be highly subjective. For me, I like a buttery, smooth rendering, and I like a wrap-around cat's eye shape to the bokeh at wide apertures. This lens scores perfectly for me in that aspect. Looking at the portraits, you will notice how the background blur swirls around, keeping the attention on my subject. You will also notice how large and smooth the background blur is. Stopping down from f1.4 to f2 to 2.8 to f4, you will notice that the bokeh remains circular due to the 11 blade aperture. Later in the video, we will compare the background blur to the 85mm f1.2 and f2 versions. To test the autofocus speed of this lens, I put it on my Canon R5, put the camera on face detection, and had my daughter run full speed right at me. The autofocus was blazingly fast. It tracked her face, and kept up with her as she was running straight towards me. The autofocus is instant, silent, and accurate. We will look at autofocus speed a little bit later when we compare this lens to the other 2 Canon offerings. Due to their large glass elements, prime lenses can sometimes wash out when the sun or a spotlight shines directly on the front element. I was pleasantly surprised at how this lens handles sun flare. There isn't as much ghosting with this lens as other 85mm lenses that I've used. There are some artifacts that appear in the bottom corner opposite of the light source, but this is normal. When I was photographing the first dances at a wedding, I tried using the lighting that the videographer was using and took a few photos into his spotlight. Notice the beautiful ring that's created on the top side of the spotlight, and then also notice the artifacts that are created in the lower corner. The center of the image remains contrasty and isn't washed out, even though the spotlight was shining directly into the lens. Compact size is a big factor for me. If the lens is lightweight and easy to hold, I find myself using it more and more. At this first wedding, I broke my record for most images ever taken with an 85mm lens. I think this was due in part to the size of the lens. It fit easily into my camera bag, allowing me to have other lenses in my bag at the same time. Even the hood is small, not taking up too much space when mounted on the lens. Canon has created these VCM lenses to all virtually be identical in size and weight, and I think they are the perfect size. They're easy to hold in the hand, they're easy to keep stable when photographing. If you have used the RF 85mm f2 IS STM Macro lens or the RF 28-70 f2.8 IS STM lens, you will notice they are very similar in size and weight. I love this as these are two other lenses I use on a wedding day. Having the lenses small means I can have more tools in my bag when I'm working and moving at a rapid pace. Now let's compare the RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM to the RF 85mm f2 IS STM Macro lens. I've been using the f2 version for the last couple years and have really enjoyed this lens. You can watch my full review by clicking the link above. If you're looking for a lens that will not only allow you to take great portraits, but also great macro shots, the RF 85mm f2 might be the version for you. Its short minimum focus distance allows you to take beautiful detail photos. Here you'll see the difference between how close I was using the f2 version compared to how far back I had to be with the f1.4 version. Here's the resulting photos. The 1.4 can get this close, whereas the f2 will allow you to get this close. f1.4's minimum focus distance, f2's minimum focus distance. 1.4, f2. On a wedding day, this allows me to get better detail photos of my rings when I can use the f2 version. Let's look at focusing speed. Going from minimum focus to locking on a subject is slow with the RF 85mm f2. Compare that now with the RF 85mm 1.4, which is virtually instant. If fast autofocus is a priority for you, the new 1.4 version is probably the way to go. If we look at manually focusing, we'll notice some interesting things here. If you switch the f2 version to manual focus and turn the dial, it's painfully slow, requiring many rotations to go to minimum focus distance. Contrast that now with the 1.4 version and you'll notice it only takes a few rotations to go from infinity focus all the way down to minimum focus. The RF 85mm f2 isn't always confident in its focusing. Here in this photo of my daughter facing away, the f2 version continued to hunt for focus to find her eyelash when I was using face detection. The f1.4 version locked on her eyelash, found it right away, and stayed on it. It didn't hesitate or glitch back and forth. Now we're going to take a look at the bokeh with these two lenses. Here's the 85 1.4, and now we have the 85mm f2. You'll notice with the 85mm 1.4, the bokeh is bigger and more smooth. With the RF 85mm f2, it's still really good for the price, but it is a little bit smaller and it's not quite as smooth. This is the f2 version, this is the 1.4 version. The f2 version has slightly smaller bokeh and it's not quite as smooth. The f1.4 version has larger bokeh and it is much more smooth. Now let's compare the sharpness between the two lenses. The 85mm 1.4 is sharper at 1.4 compared to the 85mm f2 at f2. That said, the difference isn't drastic. It's not until you get down towards the edge of the frame that you will notice that the RF 85mm 1.4 holds up sharper than the 85mm f2. Let's talk about size. These two lenses are very similar in size and weight, but there are two things to note. First, the RF 85mm f2 does not include a lens hood, so you will need to buy that separately if you want to shield the lens from flare. Second, though at first glance the 85mm f2 seems a little shorter, the barrel extends when focusing, so it actually ends up being a fair amount longer than the RF 85mm f1.4. Another difference between the two lenses is that the RF 85mm 1.4 does not include image stabilization. Though it would be nice to have, I personally prefer the savings in size and weight. If IS had been added, it would have been heavier and more expensive. Because I'm mostly using this lens for portraits, I need to use a faster shutter speed anyways because my subjects will inevitably be moving. That said, most of the time I'm careful to hold my camera as still as possible while shooting, and I have no problem getting sharp photos at 1/125th of a second, 1/50th as seen here, or even slower. Here are some photos I took hand holding this lens with my Canon R5 using the IBIS in the camera. At 1/30th of a second, I rarely had any problems getting sharp photos. Even at 1/15th of a second, I was able to get handheld photos. When I got to 1/8th of a second or 1/4th of a second, the images weren't as sharp. For the price, the RF 85mm f2 IS STM Macro lens is probably the best value of Canon's three lenses. For newer photographers, it's a lens that will up your portrait photography game quickly and give you the bonus of macro work. I have used it in many professional shoots and it's done a wonderful job. And even though I'm now going to the RF 85mm 1.4 for portraits, it's nice to know I have a great backup lens in my kit. Next, we will compare the RF 85mm 1.4 to the lens I used for several years, the RF 85mm f1.2 L USM lens. If you'd like to see my video review of that lens, you can click above. The 1.4 version actually has faster autofocus and is quieter than the 1.2 version. Here I am focusing on the tree and then switching it back to focusing on the trees in the background. As we compare the two, we notice that the 1.4 version is faster than the 1.2 version. The first thing I want to make note of when comparing these two lenses is how the 1.2 version is slightly more zoomed in than the 1.4 version. These photos were both taken on the same tripod with just swapping the lenses. We can see that if we look at the edge of the frame here. Here you'll notice there's a space between the edge of the frame and this tree. We have lost that on the 1.2 version. If we look at this side, here's the edge of this tree, a little bit of space here, way more space on the 1.4 version. Though it's a very small difference, I personally prefer the slightly wider field of view of the 1.4 version. This allows me to be a little bit closer to my subjects while I'm directing them. If you're looking for a difference in terms of sharpness, good luck. In the center, they are both as sharp as it gets, and you'll notice they retain their sharpness all the way down into the corners. In terms of bokeh, we'll notice that the 1.2 version continues to be Canon's champion. When we zoom in, we notice that the 1.2 version has the most background blur. The autofocus circles are larger and they're very smooth. That said, if we get really picky, I do notice a little bit more of an onion effect with the bokeh on the 1.2 version than I do with the 1.4 version. And though the 1.2 version has a blurrier background, the 1.4 version is not far behind. Here's a real life example. Which photo costs $1,000 more? When we zoom in, we notice they are both razor sharp. If we look at the background blur, we notice they both have beautiful bokeh in the background. And though the 1.2 version has slightly larger bokeh, for me, the savings in cost and weight cause me to choose the 1.4 version. Let's talk more about the size and weight of the 1.2 version because I think this is the most important thing to consider. The Canon RF 85mm f1.2 L USM is certainly not Canon's biggest or heaviest lens, but for me as a wedding photographer, I found it too big. Hand holding my camera for sometimes up to 12 hours on a wedding day while also carrying my lens bag and other equipment takes a big toll and every pound matters. Further, the 85.2 is hard to hold. The diameter of it is massive, making it difficult not only to take out of my bag and safely mount on my camera without dropping it, but also just to hold while photographing. This RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM solves all of these problems. It weighs half as much and is way smaller in diameter, making it a joy to put on the camera and hold while photographing. Thus, I found myself constantly reaching for the 85.1.4. At the wedding I just photographed, I used the 85mm more than any other lens in my kit. For me, the RF 85mm f1.4 is a much better deal. It's a lot cheaper, and the only real advantages the 1.2 version has is that it lets in a little bit more light and gives you a slightly blurrier background. In the end, I couldn't justify a $3,000 lens sitting in my bag that I rarely use just because it had the biggest bokeh. That said, some of you will want the best possible bokeh, and you can shoulder the weight, and therefore you might want to get the RF 85mm f1.2. It's really nice now that Canon has given us multiple offerings so we can pick the lens that suits our needs best. Another question I frequently get asked is, which lens should I get, the 85mm or the 50mm? The answer depends on a bunch of variables that only you know and will be able to answer. I like to invest my money in the lenses that I use the most. 50mm is a little bit more versatile. 85mm is a little bit better for portraiture as it renders facial proportions more accurately. Here are two side-by-side portraits taken with the 85mm 1.4 and the 50mm 1.4. You'll notice the background was brought a little bit closer with the 85mm than it was with the 50mm. Notice how his neck and shoulders look farther back in the 50mm shot than they do in the 85mm shot. His face also looks more narrow in the 50 shot than it does in the 85. In a full body photo, you'll notice the difference in the background. The background is brought closer with the 85mm. The 85mm requires you to have more space to be able to back up to get a full body photo. So if you're limited on space, the 50mm might be a better option. If you don't already have an 85 or a 50mm lens, you can always start with the RF 50mm f1.8 and the RF 85mm f2, see if you like them, see which ones you use the most, and then upgrade the one that you use the most often. Down in the description, I'll have links to all of these lenses and the cameras that I recommend. Using those links really helps support me in making these videos. Alright, let's wrap it up. I'm trying not to overhype this lens as everyone has their personal preferences, but for me, this is my favorite 85mm lens ever. I have extensively used all of Canon's 85mm lenses going all the way back to the EF lenses. After taking over 2,000 photos with this new RF 85mm f1.4 L VCM lens, I am thoroughly impressed. It solves all the issues I had with the other lenses and is an absolute joy to use. It's the perfect size, it's razor sharp, has instant autofocus, and yet gives a buttery smooth, beautiful bokeh background. All these factors result in me using it a lot. For me, this lens is a 10 out of 10, and time will tell, but it is possibly my most favorite lens ever, rounding out my favorite trio ever with the RF 35mm f1.4L and the RF 50mm f1.4L. I couldn't recommend these lenses more highly. If you would like to read the written review of my lens, in the description there will soon be a link to our blog. While on our site, you can look for other opportunities we have for photographers who want to grow as professionals. That was the Canon RF 85mm f1.4. If this video was helpful for you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to our channel. We have a lot more fun stuff coming for you. We'll see you next time. 3, 2, 1. It found her that quick? How is that even possible?